everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and in this Kickstarter preview, I'm going to be checking out Wreckland Run from Renegade Games Studios. It's worth mentioning, everything you're about to see here is in prototype form, but this prototype does look really good. And it's also worth mentioning the game trays I'm using here in this setup are not part of the game itself. I'm using them just to organize some of the components. Now, Wreckland Run is a solo game, comes from a designer that all of you are likely familiar with, has ties to Tiny Epic, has ties to Warp's Edge, a number of fantastic solo games out there in the community, and I was really excited to show this one to you to help you make an informed decision as to whether or not this is going to be for you. So without further ado, inside this video, we're going to go over the game overview. I'm quickly going to go over the game components to show you everything that I've got set up for the very first chapter of the game. But before we do that, let's go ahead and read the narrative that leads us into that. Chapter 1, The Wreckland Run. Maybe I shouldn't have decided today was the day to play grab and go. Your mind raced as you flip switches, crank knobs, and open flap tags. Even as your own cylinders vapor up, you ignite each one, careful to strike the sparkers with the right timing. The sounds of angry shouts of realization and cries for your blood reach your ears. Being a junkyard stacked top to bottom with chaotically stashed loot, you figure it would take a little while longer for those boneheads to figure out you propped up some empty frames where the boxes were. By the sounds of things, your charade did not fool them after all. After all, you can't honestly expect to rob the local bandit king and get away scot-free, could you? It's time to drive. Now, Wreckland Run is played across a campaign consisting of 7 chapters, and there is a narrative beyond what I just read, which I'm showing on screen right now. You can choose to pause it and read it if you wish, but this narrative will flush out what's going on in each chapter as you progress through all 7 of them. With each new chapter that you progress through, the continuing story is going to unfold in the campaign book, which you will see as we go through, but you'll be instructed to also open up new envelopes you can see piled up here. They're going to add exciting new bosses and enemies and gameplay twists along the way. And the contents of these are secret, so you're not going to reveal them until you reach that particular chapter. Now, at the start of a campaign, you're going to first choose a vehicle and a driver. You're going to want to choose wisely because this combination is going to carry you across all 7 chapters. Here are the 4 options inside of what I have for the prototype. There might be more beyond this. I am unsure on that, but we have these 4 to choose from, and they recommend if you're going to pick one for the very first time, you go with the Roadrunner. So right in the center of the top left-hand car, that is the car, which states Roadrunner. Will be taking that one and setting it up here on the map. Now you're going to quickly notice that this mat is actually divided into quadrants, and there are cracks that are on the playmat itself that are breaking things out into those 4 different quadrants. You have your left side, right side, back, and front. Next, we're going to go ahead and choose our driver. We have 4 options here in the prototype: Cuddles, Rudder, Miller, and Arson. And for this playthrough, I'm going to use Miller, and you'll see each of the drivers has their own ability or special ability that you're going to be able to use throughout your run. Now, for Miller, it states an exact match always deals an additional +2 single damage. And it's talking about a die, and we will talk more about how I can make use of this during the run when we get into the gameplay. With our vehicle and our driver selected, it's worth mentioning as you complete chapters within this game, of the 7 that exist, you are going to keep cards in the decks they're placed inside of. So for example, the enemies and parts you've encountered are going to remain in their decks, increasing the power of your arsenal, but also going to make your foes much more dangerous. At the beginning of a chapter, of course, you're going to read the chapter, and we've already started reading chapter number 1, and you saw pages up on the screen there earlier, so we're a little bit ahead of that, but I wanted to show you the journal because that's where all of this resides inside of, and it's broken up into tabs on the side for each of the 7 chapters. I'll go ahead and open it up to chapter 1. This narrative will certainly help in pulling you into the theme of this game and giving you an idea as to what's going on as you progress through the chapters. Flipping the page over, you're going to see on the left-hand side, which I'll zoom into in a second, has a chapter setup section, and then it talks about resolution, which you can ignore until you're at the end of the chapter. You'll grab the envelope that relates to the chapter you're playing in, open it up. The contents are detailed right at the very top of the booklet, so you can put them back in later if you want to. And as you progress, remember the cards that are in the decks as you merge them in will stay in there. We have one part here, the confetti cannon. We have the big boss, which is Big Fossil. We have Squealer and Kissin Russian Dynamite. Those two are special enemies. Those two special enemies are going to be shuffled in with the rest of the enemy deck that you will put together, which I've already set up, so they'll be shuffled in right now. Big Fossil will sit out by itself, as of course that individual is going to show up much later in the first chapter run, and the part Confetti Cannon is allowed to be attached to your starting vehicle. So I get to choose a space on my vehicle and equip it right away, as it mentions in the setup instructions at the top of the booklet. Now the setup instructions state that we can put and install the Confetti Cannon into any empty space. So that's any space that isn't already populated with something. You'll see there are 3 spaces with pre-filled in parts, which you can upgrade over top of later on if you wish, but the downside of doing so is that those 3 spots can be otherwise upgraded with special part cards. But if you happen to overwrite them with a part that you'd rather have in there instead, then you won't be able to take advantage of that special upgrade. So that's a strategic decision you have to make a little bit later on. Right now, we have to place this one into an empty slot, and we have a number to pick from. Now, you might be wondering why I chose the position I did. Well, there is something worth checking on these cards, and all this is going to come into play when you start thinking of strategy, especially if you've played your first game. But basically, at the very top of a part card, it's going to tell you when you activate that particular card, whether it be with a 4 die or higher, you're going to be able to do an attack of 1 damage to one other vehicle. Now, if you're on the angle of your vehicle, in other words, one of these 4 corners, this card is said to be able to hit things in this quadrant and the quadrant above it. Whereas if I was to place it here, it could only hit things that are here. Now, something else to keep in mind when you are placing parts on your vehicle, and it doesn't really matter with this particular part, but once we get into the very first round of play, you'll see that I'm able to install parts on the car, and they might have this red border on one side of it. It's a spiked border, essentially. Now, anywhere you see that, when you install the part on your car, if it's up against the edge of your vehicle, then when you choose to do a ram, which you can choose to ram vehicles that might be sitting on this side of the equation, you get to add up every single red card along the edge, and that's how much damage you'll do to that side or that quadrant, and you can break that up however you wish. So in this case right now, if I ram to the left, it'd be 1 damage. If I ram to the right, it would be 1 damage because I have a red spike over here. I might want to work towards building that up so I can do even more damage. Just to wrap up at a high level, the parts card, the one I just installed, I'll talk about what I can use this for, and you'll see this during gameplay. But at a high level, the card's broken down into a number of different sections. At the very top there, you're going to see a 1 next to what appears to be a bullet hole. That basically means you can target one other vehicle in one of the quadrants based on where that part is installed. So as I talked about, this 1 damage attack could hit something here or here, and I get that choice. Now, how do you actually activate that? Well, when you're rolling your dice throughout the gameplay, you'll have dice at your disposal, and if you have a value that is 4 or higher, you can place it, and it's 4, of course, because 4 is right on the card there. You can go ahead and place that die in place. Let's say we place the 6 right on the die here. That would be a valid placement and allow me to do a 1 attack against 1 vehicle. That's one way I could use it. I could put a 5 there too and do 1 attack for 1 damage in one of the quadrants. Now, what if I actually landed exactly what's on the card itself? Well, that's called a perfect die placement, and honestly, you probably want a gun for that, and that's probably because you're going to get this cool advantage on the second row here that states you can do kind of a area attack, being able to hit damage against multiple different vehicles, which can be really, really handy. Now, even with that area attack, you still have to pick a quadrant to do it in, but let's say hypothetically there were 3 vehicles in here, that 2 damage area attack could hit 2 damage against all of them, which would be huge. Now, my driver also has an ability to boost up damage, which is certainly going to be helpful as we go through as well, so I could get even more out of it. So in this case, if I placed a 4 on this part, that 1 that's at the very top of the card would get the boost of +2 damage, so I'd be able to do a 3 damage attack to either of the 2 quadrants on the left-hand side or up top. One of those vehicles and one of those quadrants would be getting hit for 3. That's pretty good. And then right after that, I could choose a quadrant to then do an area attack, hitting each vehicle in that quadrant for 2, which is pretty awesome overall. Now, there's more, and there will be even more as we continue to progress through this video, but for now, let's scale back and head back into the journal, taking a look at the page which is going to track our rounds, the wreckage phase, the run phase, and get ourselves set up for this first Wreckland run. Once you're done with the setup instructions on the left-hand side, I just simply folded it underneath of the journal so that all you have here is just the boss mat going forward. The boss mat here talks about what happens on the boss run. A lot of this you're going to want to read, but you're not going to necessarily need to keep in your mind right off the hop. But down here on the round track, it's pretty important because this is where your round marker is going to sit. We'll talk more about this as we go, but you're going through 3 rounds in order to get out of the chapter, hopefully successfully. And down below we have 2 phase charts here, a wreckage phase on the left and a run phase on the right. You'll be rolling on these tables at certain times during gameplay. You're going to go ahead and shuffle the part cards, which have the wrench and gear icon on the back, placing them face down and making a deck. Shuffling the enemy cards, placing them in a face down deck as we've already done. Collecting all 8 dice, 5 white and 3 red, placing them in front of you. We're going to have the damage tokens, which I've placed in game trays. Again, not part of the final production, but I'm using them to keep things organized. And of course, we had the round track already set. We also are going to have an area where we can keep scrap, which I'm going to leave just to the right of where my driver is, a little bit lower out of screen. And then I have my damage cards just at a screen right here as well. Now you'll remember earlier when I alluded to the ability of being able to upgrade the 3 parts that are already a part of your vehicle. Well, these are those 3 upgrade cards. Pretty easy to find because on the back side it will tell you which vehicle they relate to. So there's a deck of them and there's 3 for each of the vehicles inside the game. You just lay them out in front of this journal. Now let's talk about the difficulty within this game. Now for each chapter of the campaign you can choose your difficulty, so you can scale this however you want, and it's handled by how many cards are going to become scrap for you to be able to be used during your gameplay. Now if you go on the expert level, you're not going to get anything. If you go on the normal level, you get to draw 2 cards off the top of the enemy deck, flip them face up, and they get added to your scrap area to be used later on. If you go with the easy mode, you're going to get 4 cards off the top of the deck for your scrap area. In this play, I'll go with normal. Taking 2 cards, flipping them face up, I've just placed them like this. This is the easiest way I find to be able to visually see the dice on the scrap cards. That's all you're really going to need to focus on because that's exactly how you'll be using these cards as you choose to play them throughout the game. And I'll talk more about how you can use scrap as we go along into gameplay. Wrapping up the game overview section of the video, this game, Wreckland Run, is played over 3 rounds, as I mentioned prior. Each round has 2 distinct phases. Wreckage, where you repair and outfit your vehicle with new and upgraded parts, and then Run, where you battle the enemy vehicles over a series of 6-step turns and hopefully live to survive another day. Now the third run also includes the boss card. We already have the boss card set up. It's Big Fossil, and it's the final foe you have to defeat in order to complete your run through the Wreckland. Now, of course, you win the game by defeating the boss card in that third and final run of the game, and you lose the game if your vehicle blows up before the end by taking too much damage to your core equal to its strength. The core of our vehicle, the Roadrunner, has a strength of 9, and damage can slip past parts on the outside of the car and land inside the core. And as you go ahead through our very first phase here, the wreckage phase, you're going to want to try to equip your car to the point where the parts are going to keep the core from sustaining too much damage. So as you can see by the round tracker, as we head into our very first round of play, we start with the wreckage phase. It has a 7 there next to a deck of cards, letting us know we get to go ahead to the parts deck and draw up 7 cards, placing them in front of us. So these are the 7 part cards that I've drawn up, and I've placed them here in front of me, and I'm going to be trying to purchase ones that are of interest to me in order to install them on my vehicle. But first, we need to go ahead and make a roll with all the dice in the game. So we're going to roll all 8 of these together. This die roll is going to create the dice pool that I can then spend to build and repair part cards on my vehicle. Let's see what we get. With my part cards in place, available to me, and my dice pool now rolled, I'm ready to begin the wreckage phase where I can install parts onto my car, repair them, or even re-roll the dice pool itself. Now, this is one of the times where scrap can be really, really useful, because not only do you have the pool of dice you rolled available to it, you have the potential to use scrap that you have. The dice that are sitting on those cards represent the die value, and you can use that actual value by discarding the card into a discard pile as if you had the die itself. So this can help you to create sets or runs that you can then use to purchase parts up here in order to install in your vehicle. So you can make use of these, or you can save them, and that's part of the strategy. Let's talk about re-rolling the dice first. Now, if you're looking at your dice and you don't like the values that you have, or maybe even in the scrap area you don't have die values that you like, and you really want to change up what's going on in this section here, you can choose to go ahead and discard one of the cards in your parts row in order to re-roll any number of unused dice. So that can help you to potentially recreate or change up your options in terms of purchasing and installing. Now, installing is one of the major things you're going to do in the very first wreckage phase, because, well, you're not going to be repairing too much as there's not much damage going on just yet. So installing, you're going to be looking at the bottom of each of these part cards, and you will see these letters all in a row sometimes. Sometimes they're in a sequence like A, B, C, D. Sometimes it's A, A, B, B, like the finisher one. So for instance, with the finisher where it says A, A, B, B, that simply means you need to have two sets of two dice that are exactly the same. So you could have two ones and two twos. That would be able to be cashed in to purchase that part. Now, the thing to keep an eye on, and strategy-wise you have to think about, is it's not that simple. You also have white dice and red dice. The white dice have no negative effects for using them to buy parts, whereas the red dice will have a negative effect. Is after you've used them to get the part you want and install it, you're going to have to roll those red dice and then roll them on the chart, which is on the boss sheet for the wreckage phase, but there is a 50-50 chance of that occurring. So just so you have a better understanding of the con side of the equation to using and spending red dice when you're going ahead and putting parts on your vehicle during the wreckage phase, you'll see if I happen to spend them and use them, I'm going to have to roll those red dice on this chart. And as I mentioned, 50% chance of nothing happening, but 50% chance of something bad happening. We could have a dealing of 1 damage to a part of your choice, ignoring all shields, dealing 2 damage to a part of your choice, ignoring shields, or placing a damage card onto the vehicle slot of your choice. That's really bad. That just full-on blows out that particular part of the car, and that is something you don't want to have happen. So as you're likely seeing, what seems to be quite easy in terms of using dice to purchase things all of a sudden becomes a little bit more strategic quite quickly, because there's that risk-reward factor of using these red dice or not. You could just choose to use all the white ones and stop there, but then you don't get the availability of using all the red dice and maybe getting more parts for your vehicle, thereby leaving your vehicle more exposed. So it's a fun balance of trying to figure out how much to get and how much to hold off. Just before I start purchasing a bunch of stuff, on screen you are going to see a reference for all the different types of dice pairings that you could potentially see across part cards, and the explanation as to what kinds of dice and combinations you would need to have in order to buy them. This will better help you understand what I'm about to do. Now, this should be quite entertaining. The one I'm looking at is this finisher one over here. I think it'd be really good. It has a nice area attack. If I get a perfect die, it also does 2 damage on top of it. It has 2 usages because there's 2 die slots on it, so that makes it handy as well. And the other thing is I can use 3 white dice and 1 red one in order to make this work. So 2 A's and 2 B's means 2 dice of the same value in each pair. So I've got 2 5s and 2 2s. Now the only thing is I can do this right now and install this on my car, but after I do so, I have to go ahead and re-roll this red one on that wreckage phase chart to see what kind of nastiness comes at me, and hopefully we get lucky. So let's go ahead and install this thing. Now, looking at my car currently, I've got some decent stuff going on to the left-hand side of the vehicle, but not so much on the right-hand side. So maybe I will place this one on the back right corner. And just like that, our Roadrunner's getting a little bit stronger. Now let's roll the 1 die that we used to pay for that, which is red, and we're gonna roll that on this wreckage phase chart. Let's see what we get. A 2, we are safe, so we don't take any damage at all. There's something super satisfying about that risk-reward factor of using red dice to get parts in your vehicle. I absolutely love it. It's terrifying when the die roll doesn't go your way, and it probably will happen because I'm going to attempt to push my luck here in order to use the 4 dice that have remaining to put something together. Now you'll see I have 3 1s already. Looking across what we got here, I could just go ahead and take this recycler card, which actually wouldn't be all that bad. It's pretty strong. It gives me 5 on that particular part. It has good damage up front, and it has a nice ability there on top of it as well, with 2 locations for dice. So that actually might not be a bad one to put on. All right, now there's a number of cards here that I'm eyeing, but what I'm thinking of doing is trying to re-roll my way out of this. Now, again, I can take that recycler if I want to, but of course, if I re-roll these dice, I may not be able to even take that. But as long as I'm discarding these part cards, I can keep on re-rolling, hoping to land the combination of dice that I want to spend to get the particular part I want. And I am kind of gunning for the Spike Rammer and the Death Stare. That's the 2 that I like the most. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to discard this electric net right here. This is going to get tossed, and we are going to re-roll these dice, and we're going to hope for better values. And I mean, getting an ascending order sequence is going to be tough, but again, remember, we can keep as many dice as we want every time we do a re-roll. So we can work our way towards it and just hope we don't run out of parts to discard to do this. So we got ourselves, ooh, and that one I'll re-roll because it's kind of sitting perfectly. A 3, a 2, and a 4. That's actually not a bad start. So not bad. I have a 2, 3, and a 4. Just need a 1 or a 5 to make this work. I'm going to talk quickly about some of the icons on these cards you haven't heard about yet. Now these red ones right here in the middle, they're pretty cool. They allow you to set dice aside so it's not re-rolled in the next step. You'll see when we get into the run phase why that is a very nice one to have. You can keep the dice that you want to use on maybe your heavier hitting parts, for instance, and it's going to be really handy. Another thing here, of course, the bullet holes. If you happen to see 2 in a row like this, it means you have to attack, in this case, 1 vehicle for each one of them, and they have to be different vehicles. And of course, there has to actually be 2 vehicles to hit. If there's only 1 in the quadrant, you can only hit 1, and the other damage just goes to waste. The steering wheel over here, that is going to allow you to move an enemy card of your choice from the section that this thing correlates to based on where it's in your car, and you're going to be allowed to move an enemy card into a different quadrant. So that can really help you to manage the vehicles that are constantly surrounding you, and you're going to see that very soon as well. Now the fire icon with the die in it at the very end there allows you to remove a place die from one of your parts or an enemy card. This allows you to free up a dice space available on a part that you might want to make use of again very, very soon. In order to re-roll, I've gone ahead and discarded the steel rocker part in order to roll this 1 die, hoping I get a 1 or a 5. No, it's not going to work out. Okay, so I got to discard something else. Well, if I'm working towards what I'm working towards here, I want to keep this one in case things go real south, because as of right now, I could still get this with what I have here. So that's the one I want to hold on to for sure. I'm trying to get this. So let's go with this one. The recycler is going to get tossed. I'm going to be putting these in a separate discard pile. Let's see if we get lucky. Yes, got it. Okay, perfect. Now I just have a decision to make. I'm going to choose to spend this sequence of dice in order to install the Spike Rammer. And the thing that pushed me over the edge is the fact it does have a red side. And it works really well because if I placed on the left-hand side of my vehicle, I will have 2 red parts on the left-hand side and 2 red parts on the right-hand side, making ramming a decent option on both sides. Now you'll notice that there is actually a red border on the bottom and the side of this one, so you might think, hey, you should probably place this right here on the lifeline, and you can if you wish. But remember, if I go ahead and install it on this corner, not only am I kind of not filling up all the empty holes that could then lead to damage going straight to my core, but also I'm removing any potential chance of using an upgrade card in the future in order to boost this lifeline from what it's currently at. I can boost up to this major lifeline. And the other thing that this thing does really well on the Roadrunner is it's great for repairing while you're out on the road. So I'll just go ahead and install it here on the left-hand side of my vehicle. So as I said before, got 2 red on the left, 2 red on the right. Ramming is going to be a great option. Now, in terms of which dice that I use to complete my sequence, I'm actually going to make a change here. And this is something you're going to definitely want to keep an eye on in order to avoid rolling on that wreckage phase chart. As you can see, I have a scrap card with a 3 on it, which I could use and will be doing instead of using the red die of 3. And the reason I want to do that is even though the die on the scrap is red, I won't have to roll on the chart if I use this. So I'm absolutely going to go ahead and use this 3 instead of the red 3 in order to complete the sequence. So keep an eye out for that in order to avoid having to roll on this chart. But remember, we still had 1 more red die, so we do have to roll once. Let's see what happens. A 4, that is going to deal 1 damage to a part of your choice, ignoring lowering all shields. Red dice are very unstable, so you have to be extra careful when you're using them to install parts. And in this case, this one kind of backfired on us while we were installing it, causing some damage. Now on the far left-hand side here with the red ones, they represent 5 damage. Orange represents 1 damage. We'll be placing 1 orange gem on one of the parts. So the bonus of using that scrap was I was able to keep a die in my pool still. So when I rolled the other red die and got 1 damage, which I now have to place on something, and I'll just go ahead and place it on one of my parts, I'm going to ensure that I place it on a part. I'll place it on this one right here, the automatic reloader. It has up to 4 damage it can take before it implodes and is destroyed, and then I place a damaged card on top of it. But right now it has just 1 damage. I can choose to repair during this wreckage phase as well. I can spend a die so long as it's equal to or greater than the part I'm trying to repair. For this particular card, if you happen to have a 2 exactly when you choose to repair it with a die, then you can actually repair all the damage on that part. But in my case, it's higher than a 2, so that's still good. I still get to repair something. It just repairs only for 2 damage. But in this case, that works out just fine. So we're going into this run in a second here with absolutely no damage, and we were able to equip a couple things on our vehicle, so that's good news. Now down in the bottom right, you'll see a part that has 2 dice faces, a 5 and a 4. So let's say hypothetically on this 5 strength part that could take up to 5 damage before it explodes and has fire damage in that back corner. Let's say there was 4 damage on it and we wanted to repair it. If I used either a 4 or a 5, I only have to use 1 die of the faces that are showing on the card. I can repair everything that's on it in terms of damage. But if I had a 6, it would just be a repair of 2. Now, of course, if I had anything lower than the actual values on the card, you're not going to be able to repair it at all. And the core of the vehicle can also never be repaired this way. Finally, you likely noticed that I didn't actually use any special upgrades in terms of upgrading any of the 3 different positions on my car. I did this on purpose because I wanted to slot more parts into the empty sections of my vehicle before focusing on upgrading some of the 3 that are already in play. But if you do want to upgrade these, they're as simple as just paying the value that's associated to the card and then placing it on the slot. Now it's time for us to run in Wreckland Run, and this is the point where the enemy is on top of us. Now after we've outfitted our vehicle, got it all ready and repaired up as best we can, of course things are looking pretty good when you start things off, but as we go through each of these rounds, well, our vehicle is going to be under some maintenance as we go along. We're moving into the run phase, and you'll see as I move the round marker up, just below it there, it shows the actual car represented by the icon, red card, and the wheel. It has numbers around it. That is going to tell you how many enemies you're going to reveal from the enemy deck and place in each of the quadrants around your vehicle. So just as soon as we've hit the open road, a whole bunch of friends from the wasteland have come to visit us. In the run phase of the game, we start things off by grabbing all of the dice and rolling them. Similar to the wreckage phase, this is going to be your die pool during the run, for not only you, but also your enemies. Inside this run phase, we go through what's called a turn flow, which is 6 steps in total. You're gonna be rolling all the dice, which I just did, going through steps 1 and 2. The first one is to place a red enemy die of my choosing out in play. You'll see that in a second. Then the second step is to use 1 up to 3 white dice from the pool that I have available. Then we re-roll all remaining dice, do the exact same thing again, placing a red die, and then placing 1 to 3 white dice. And then the last one is to re-roll again and place an enemy red die. And if we actually have any white dice at that point, we would play the rest of them as well. That would wrap up the entire turn flow. And of course, if your core explodes because you take too much damage, then you lose, and you of course can come back and try to replay this. So if you happen to be a number of chapters in, you could keep replaying the same chapter to progress. And in order to progress though, you need to have 2 or fewer enemies remaining at the end of a full turn. Now I'm going to quickly highlight all the red dice and all the enemies so you have an understanding of what's going on here, because some of them are way up top there. So way up in the north, we have a 2 pip die. We have a 4 over here, a 3, 2 5s, a 1, and a 4. So the one thing to take note of is when we choose to place a red enemy die, we place that die on one of the vehicles that match the same pip value. The interesting thing about this is, let's say hypothetically I use the 4 here on this bullet for you one. I am choosing which one activates, but any other vehicle that has the exact same pip value is also going to activate. So if I choose to use the 4, we're going to have an activation here and over here. If I choose to use the 6, well, there's not a single vehicle with a 6 on it, so we'd be going to the boss sheet and the run phase chart and rolling on it. And I can tell you right now, it's not good. It represents the boss constantly hounding you. It's not in play yet, but you can picture the boss just being nearby, far enough away we can't get to it, but just enough to cause pain and suffering to our vehicle as we're driving along. And then we have a 1, and the 1 would actually just activate this one here. So it does become a game of triggering enemies at specific timing based on whatever you're planning to do potentially with your white dice. Now, as bad as this might sound, I'm going to go ahead and actually have the 4 activate first. And the reason I'm doing this is because I really want to try and get this Fury of Flames car up into the top section, because if I have 2 cars up top, I could use my twin blasters right in the middle to hit both of them. And I know that I have a 3 available. That could be a wise thing to do to make sure I'm not just wasting ammo. I do still have the confetti cannon, but I can use that on the angle to choose here or here in the future. So let's go ahead and activate 4, and I get to choose which of these 2 cars actually gets the die placed on it. Now, it doesn't really matter which of the 2 vehicles I was to place this 4 pip die on. It's just simply to help us to remember what has been activated or used already in terms of the dice. So we'll go ahead right now. We're doing a 3 damage hit going up against our back side of the vehicle, which I have to choose whether I'm placing on the lifeline part or on the right-hand side with the finisher. So our back left tire has been hit pretty good. Lifeline area is damaged. We're going to probably want to focus on repairing that. And a good thing I have a couple of 3s in my back pocket to make that possible. It's worth mentioning that as soon as you activate a vehicle, you're going to move it clockwise around the quadrant. So it's going to move from the back position to the left position, and this is going to constantly keep these cars shifting around your vehicle, messing with you from all sides. This vehicle over here, Fury of Flames, is going to activate as it has a 4, and it's going to do 2 damage to one of the 3 parts on the left-hand side. And I get to choose which one it hits. I definitely don't want it to hit the lifeline, because that would push it over its 4 strength and have it explode, and then that section of the vehicle becomes a lot less useful for me. So let's go ahead and put it in one of the 2 other spots. So as you can see, where you placed your parts really does matter, and where you place your damage also matters. And of course, their overall aim, the enemies, is trying to get through to your core. Of course, they'd love to blast parts off of your vehicle, reduce what you can potentially use as you go through the run, but their overall goal is to get to that core, which means chipping away at your vehicle piece by piece. And just before, literally just before I was about to take my first turn here with Miller in terms of using a white die, I learned, based on looking at the ability here and also trying to decipher how it's used with the part cards. Of course, we know in the part cards at the very top, there's some damage in some cases, and if you get a perfect die, there can be damage. But the way this card is worded, it makes it quite tricky to understand exactly where the 2 damage gets pinned to, especially when you have multiple targets or you have an area attack, and of course you already potentially could have 2 attacks on the card, and that just gets more confusing. You'll see it says an exact match always deals an additional +2 single damage, and when I followed up with Renegade Game Studios, they actually have confirmed with me that they're going to tweak this particular ability to be more clear. So because of this, I'm going to go ahead and actually remove Miller from the equation, which doesn't change anything gameplay wise because we haven't gotten deep enough in yet. That's the only thing we're going to do, just switch out a driver. So the new driver to come in is going to be Rudder, and it states anytime you take a ramming action afterwards, deal 1 area damage to the rear section. So I had already planned to do lots with ramming, so this should certainly be a boost for me. It's worth mentioning, just like in the wreckage phase, you can use scrap cards as if they were dice. You can just simply discard the scrap card to activate a part on your vehicle that has at least 1 open die slot. Now when you do this, you use the ability, but you don't of course have to place any die in the space, which is a nice way of getting 2 uses out of 1 part, especially when the part only has a single die face. Now you're already familiar with how you're going to go ahead and activate a particular part, just placing a die of equal or higher value onto the die slot. But there is a core in the center, and as you can see, it says RAM, and there's kind of a row there where you can place dice of any value, so basically just use a die, in order to choose to RAM. And then of course you just go ahead, as I mentioned prior, adding up all the red spiked cards you have on one side of your vehicle, and then dealing that much damage and distributing it as you want to that quadrant. So the core of this vehicle has 9 strength, and to the right of it, when you get 1s or a 2, you have 3 special abilities available to you, in addition to, of course, just using them blindly for ramming actions. You can place a die of value 1 or 2 on the core below the ram section, and a single placement allows you to choose to activate one of the 3 listed abilities based on the icons you can see there. One is to re-roll the rest of the color. The other option is to adjust another die by 1, or you can store a die. Now, one strategy might be to focus on what you know is going to be activating in the future, but just based on my current allotment of parts and where the vehicles are that are going to activate, there is going to be one more. I'm not going to be able to do enough damage to take it out before it actually activates unless I burn a lot of dice to do some rerolls. So instead, let's focus on taking advantage of the fact there are 2 vehicles positioned north, which is what I set myself up for, to do some decent attacks and take out one and heavily hurt the other, I hope. Placing a perfect die on that part, the twin blasters, I'm able to do 2 separate attacks for 1 damage apiece, and you'll see because it's a perfect die, it's a +1 to each of the attacks. So it's going to be 2 damage going towards each of the vehicles, and both of them don't have shields, so it goes straight through. So the 6 is now down to 4, the 5 is down to 3, and this sets me up for potentially using the confetti cannon in the future in order to take out that far right vehicle. However, I'm going to go ahead and use my final scrap card, which has a 4 on it, in order to activate the confetti cannon, which will do 1 damage to whichever target in the top section I choose. And again, because this card is on an angle, I could choose anything in this section down here, but again, my focus is up top. I'm going to put 1 damage on the 5 strength vehicle. Next up, because it was a perfect die placement of 4, I'm going to get the area attack of 2, which is going to hit for 2 damage on both vehicles. That will take out the right vehicle and extremely damage the left one. Now, you remember earlier on during the game overview, I told you that if you get a perfect hit on the vehicle, which you can either get in 1 attack, or you could build yourself up over a series of attacks to land the exact value in damage of the strength of the vehicle, which I just did. That 2 damage on the 3 that was already there makes it a perfect 5, which means I can now take the destroyed vehicle as scrap. For instance, if I had have put 3 damage as my final attack, that would have been 1 more than the strength could handle, and I wouldn't get to keep it as scrap. So there is a lot of strategy in trying to take out cards in order to keep these cards for later use. So I've gone ahead and used 1 of my 3 dice for this step, and I could stop right here and we could go to resolving a red die if I want to, but I'd like to keep pushing things. And it's worth mentioning that you have to actually use a physical die in order for it to count as part of the 1 to 3 white dice you can use in this step. So when I used that 1 scrap card for a 4 die, that doesn't count against the 1 to 3 physical dice I can actually use. So I've only used 1 die truly right now, which again goes to show how much scrap can be really useful, because it basically gives you additional actions and turns. The next part I'm going to activate on my turn is the Spike Rammer, and I'm going to use it for its 3 damage attack at the top. Now, the actual die that would have been a perfect value here would have been a 4 here, but I don't need the ability in between to trigger right now. It would allow me to, instead of doing 3 damage, discard this card completely to deal 4 to 7, which I could choose any value in there to try and get like a perfect kill off of one of these cards. But I don't need to do that, so I just put a 6 on here, activating 3 damage. I'm going to throw that 3 damage against this vehicle. It has 1 shield, so it gets knocked down by 1. 2 damage gets through, and that is enough to meet its strength value. So bullet for you is gone. And I also get to take that card as scrap. Now I'm going to go ahead and use Lifeline here. It's a perfect match, and at the top I get to do a 2 damage attack, and then for the perfect match of the die, it states here I get to repair a part for 2. I took 2 damage off of the Lifeline part, and 1 damage got through on Eat My Dust. So that's the first 2 steps of a 6-step turn, and you're going to repeat this over and over again. But in between each 2 steps of placing a red die or activating a red die, and then using 1 to 3 white dice, you're going to go ahead and re-roll the pool pool of leftover dice, which is why when I talked about the core ability here, where you can place a 1 or a 2 on it in order to save a die from being re-rolled, that definitely comes into play as a strategy. If you see a die from an earlier roll you really want to hold on to for a powerful ability, you might want to hold on to that die, and that ability will let you do so. So let's see what the dice have for us this time around. We got ourselves a 1, a 2, a 4, and a 6. Red die activation of a 1 there for the Nightmare Fuel, doing some damage, 2 damage to the lifeline part and 1 to the finisher based on the 2 attacks it has, and now it's going to move clockwise around. Now let's determine what dice we want to use and how to spend them. Let's go ahead and use a perfect die on this part, allowing me to do 1 damage to the Fury of Flames, which brings up to 5, and then it also triggers the area attack, which I'm going to have go against the Fury of Flames. The unfortunate thing is that will be more damage than the strength in the end in terms of going over its damage capacity, so I won't get this one as scrap, but that's okay. I really just want to whittle this group of vehicles down as fast as possible. I'm going to choose to actually do some ramming, so we're going to ram from the left hand side of the vehicle. I placed a 6 on the core to represent that there's a ram row, so I just basically placed my die in there. So 2 damage going to each of the vehicles on the left quadrant or section. They both have a shield of 1, unfortunately, so only 1 damage getting through on both. Those vehicles have taken some damage, and Rudder's ability states anytime you take a ramming action afterwards, deal 1 area damage to the rear section. It will be really handy to use, but remember, a lot of the cars that I have in play right now have 1 shield, so at this point in time, that ability is not going to be as useful. Now let's go ahead and re-roll the last die, the only one left, which is the red one. Now I do still have 2 scrap. I could have used them during my turn, but I think I'm just going to hold off. Things are going fairly well for right now. We'll see how things continue to go. We rolled a 5. Oh wow, that's actually going to activate the Sand plus Stuff vehicle on the right. So that vehicle did 2 damage to us. I placed it on the automatic reloader there in the middle, and it moved clockwise around to the back section behind us. At this point, we are done a full turn, and it's worth mentioning at this point you check to see if you have 2 vehicles or less. If you do, then we are done our run. Currently we have 3, so we need to continue going. We're going to take all the dice off the cards and re-roll and begin the turn flow again. Let's see what this first roll has for us out of the gates. Trying to mitigate these red dice and determine which ones to activate is part of the fun here. So you can see I have a 3, which I could activate this Eat My Dust one. Area attack of 1, so 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage. That would put this at 4, and that would actually have that particular part and section explode into a ball of fire, which I don't really want necessarily. Now we're going to take a quick look at the run phase chart, because if I choose not to, well, at this point, the only other option if I don't want to do that is to roll in that run phase chart. I want to show you the nastiness that can come from that. Now the advantage to rolling on this chart is you don't have to activate any vehicles and anything like that, but the downside is there is a risk, as you can see if you roll a 3, that you could actually have more cars enter the fray even when you think you're actually getting ahead. I'm feeling quite confident with how things are going, and I've been able to take out a good chunk of the vehicles, but one could show up. And then on top of it, if we go this route, the damage that goes against a particular part is typically way more aggressive coming from this run phase or boss chart when you choose to be basically attacked by the boss versus just having an activation with a car. But sometimes you're not going to have a choice. Let's find out what kind of pain is coming my way from the boss sheet. It is a 3 indeed, so we have another car coming in. We have another vehicle showing up in the rear section as mentioned on the chart. So Big Fossil is pulling in the reinforcements, seeing as I'm doing pretty good on this run so far. At least I feel that way, but things could change here quick. I'm going to go ahead and use a ram. So a 1 pip die there on the core, and that's going to do 2 damage to the vehicles in this area here, and I can choose how I want to distribute that damage, plus I get the additional benefit of the rudder ability on my driver. So when I'm taking a ramming action, as I mentioned before, I can deal 1 area damage to the rear section. Does nothing for Sand and Stuff because there's a shield of 1, but the new car that just comes in actually takes a damage. Now the 2 damage that I'm choosing to go to this section can be distributed in any way I want. I could put 1 on this one, 1 on this one, although that'd be a really bad idea because they both have shields, so just do nothing. So I'm lumping the 2 damage together to get past the shield and hit Eat My Dust for an additional 1. We're also going to have the choice when we ram vehicles and they're impacted by the damage to then shift them into different positions. And this one down here also took a damage as mentioned. I chose to take the Eat My Dust vehicle and put it up north, and the one that was back here shifted over here to the west. Now I can choose whichever direction I want to go. Remember, normally when you're activating an enemy, which is not what's happening right now, you do it in a clockwise fashion after they make an attack and they activate. Whereas with this ramming action that I'm doing on my turn or my step, I'm able to choose where I want to push these individual vehicles. So it can be a very strategic thing to try to think about what side of the vehicle you want them on. Next, I'm placing a die in the confetti cannon part top left, and it's a perfect die placement, so I get to do a regular attack to one target in a section of 1 damage, which I'm going to choose to hit this new vehicle that has pulled up at the rear and come around and already has a damage on it. It will now get another one, and then I'm going to do an area attack because this is a perfect die placement to all of the vehicles in this area. The shield absorbs one over here, so 1 gets through, and 2 goes right on to that one, which is a perfect kill at the exact strength value, so I get to take that one as scrap. So at this point, I've used 2 of my white dice. I could use another white die. I could use scrap in order to take free actions. I am pushing pretty hard to get to 2 or less cars by the end of this turn flow, but that still means I got a bunch of red dice that I'll need to place, which could potentially bring more dice into the, or not dice, but other enemies into the equation, or activate these enemies that could really hurt me. Now with a 5, 1, and a 6, and just looking at my options here, I am checking out the twin blasters up top. That would be awesome to be able to use that and take out that car up there, but I don't have a die that matches perfectly, and 1 damage that goes through to a target would be absorbed inside the shield, which would do nothing. I need to get a perfect die on that. I also don't have any scrap that matches, and I would have to burn a lot of white dice in order to try to uptick something down to, or up to 3, which I don't know if I really want to do. So I might actually stop right here and hope that the re-roll is going to save me. Let's see what the dice pool initially has for us here. We got a 6 and a 4 for the enemies. With no vehicles to activate, we're going to go to the chart here and roll, see what happens. We got ourselves a 5. It's dealing 3 damage to a part of your choice, ignoring all shields. I'm going to have the confetti cannon part be hit for 3, and now we can go to spending some white dice or using scrap. Now this is a great example of one of the clarifications inside the rulebook when it comes to exact matches in a situation where you may not want to trigger the perfect die ability. Now in a case where you place, like I just did, a 4 here, and I probably won't be doing this, but I'll do this for example purposes. If I placed a 4 here, it's a perfect match. I get the 3 damage attack, which I'd throw at this thing, and it would end up with 2 damage on the vehicle. But because it's a perfect match, we'd have to go ahead and take advantage of the ability there, unless the word may is in there. Then you don't have to do it. Now this thing states if I was to use a 4, I would have to discard this instead to deal 4 to 7 damage. It's not exactly something I want to do. It's not a bad thing per se, but it's pretty bad to leave more parts of my vehicle open or exposed going forward. But those are the kind of things you have to weigh. So instead of using a white die, I'm going to use a piece of scrap that has a value that is higher than the die face on the card, so I can activate it and get the advantage of the 3 attack without triggering the perfect die ability. So 3 going on this, -1 for shield, is 2 damage. Next up, I'm going to use a die in the ram position, and I'm going to ram into this Nightmare Fuel vehicle for 2 damage thanks to the 2 red parts there. The shield absorbs 1, the other gets through, and it's a perfect knockoff, which means I get to take the Nightmare Fuel card as a scrap card. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a 1 down here in the bottom section. This just flipped over to a 2 by accident, but it's going to go right down here in the bottom section in order for me to tick down this 4 to a 3, and then I'm going to use this 3 up here as a perfect die result. So it's a 1 hit with a +1. It's going to be 2 damage against 1 shield, so 1 damage gets through, and that final damage will be enough to take out the lead vehicle in front of me, and I can also keep it as scrap. That's going to do it. I'm going to take the final die. There's only a red die left. Re-roll it. It ends up being a 4. There is no car currently on the map that has a 4 on it. The one behind us right here is 5 and 5, so we're going to be rolling on the run phase chart. Let's see how this roll goes. Hopefully it's not bad. Oh no, this one is a 6. It says deal 4 damage to a part of your choice. That is a lot. Well, this is pretty much bad news. As you can see from all the parts that I have around me here, none of them can take 4 damage without imploding into a ball of flame. So I am losing something. I decided to throw all that damage at the finisher bottom right part, and it's worth mentioning any damage beyond it just gets discarded. That's going to end off the turn, and it's also going to wrap up round number 1. We're going to go into round number 2, where we're going to draw up more parts, and we're going to try to install or repair or re-roll dice in order to try and deal with all of the damage we have on our vehicle currently. Now, it's worth mentioning, how does damage eventually hit the core? So if there was an attack that didn't have a part in place in order for that damage to go on it, then that damage would go to the core. So let's say, for instance, at the very top section there, we've got 2 parts in place. There's an opening on the right hand side. Let's say we had a vehicle in here that happened to have an area attack of 1 damage apiece. It would hit each of the 2 parts 1 at a time for 1 damage each. The empty space would take a damage, which would then go straight to the core. So as you can see, you're always trying to have as many parts around your vehicle as possible to prevent that damage from seeping past the side based on the section it's being fired from, and then eventually getting towards your core and basically overwhelming it to the point of blowing up. Thematically, all of the other enemy cars, 2 or less, that were left at the end of the turn basically just disappear. They kind of get scared away by what you were able to accomplish, but we weren't able to get away scot-free. We have a lot of damage on our vehicle, and now we move the round marker into round number 2, where we go ahead and pull cards and go through the exact same similar type of round we saw before, but of course now we're going into the next round with much more damage, meaning that this next round is going to be that much tougher to survive. And then after that, we have to go through a round number 3, where the boss, Big Fossil, arrives on scene. As you progress through the rounds, you'll eventually get to the 3rd round, which is called the final run, and in that last phase, you're going to face off against the boss car, and after miles and miles of steel carnage and blasting vehicles aside, and hopefully trying to keep your vehicle intact, because otherwise you lose, you're going to have the boss vehicle finally catch up with you. In this first chapter, that would be Big Fossil. And as you can see from the run phase setup for round number 3, when you reach that, the boss vehicle will be placed for chapter number 1 in the rear section just behind your vehicle as it's finally caught up with you. And you're not only going to have to take that boss vehicle out, as I mentioned, but also be taking out other vehicles that are going to show up. And you can see there'll be 2 on every side of you. Now, the boss car can be assigned dice to attack and move around your vehicle like any other car, as you saw earlier in the video. However, it gains the protection of the other cars in its section. The boss car can only be damaged if it's the only car in its section. Otherwise, it cannot take any damage, no matter what type of attack it is. Now, there might be some variation depending on the boss, and those details you'll be able to find inside the journal. So as you can see in the top left-hand corner here, it says Big Fossil cannot be damaged if there are other enemy cars in this section, as I just mentioned, and below it, in the run section with the boss, it says at the end of the run turn, after all dice and movement have been resolved, Big Fossil moves to the section with the most enemies. So this boss is smart. It is purposely trying to keep itself alive, and it's going to use anyone else in his way in order to block any incoming damage. So even though you'll be dealing damage, hopefully right to the boss card and also taking out other cars as well as you go through, you immediately win the game if you take out the boss car in the 3rd and final run of the game. And of course, you lose the game if your vehicle blows up by taking damage to your core equal to its strength. Once you've beaten the current chapter, you progress to the next one. As before, you do the exact same thing. You'll read the chapter, set it up, and get going on your run. Now, you want to keep in mind that enemies and parts that are introduced in previous chapters, as I mentioned prior, are always shuffled into their decks for the remainder of the campaign, as noted in the campaign book. So things are getting tougher, but other options are opening up for you to mitigate things as you go along. If you ever need to completely reset the campaign and start over, you have icons on all the cards per the different envelopes, so you can make sure you get them all back where they belong. But the journal will also list out those components as you saw before, so this game is resettable and replayable. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up this game overview and gameplay video for Wreckland Run from Renegade Games Studios. Really hope this helps you make an informed decision on this solo game. I very much enjoyed my time with this one and cannot wait to see the final version. It's a lot of fun. It's very puzzly. There's a lot of different strategic decisions and ways to mitigate what's going on, and I like the gameplay, and the theme really does wrap around it so well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.